trail of rats on his heels. It was the only thing I could think as my bare feet slapped against the damp street. I wiggled my toes to dislodge the occasional pebble trapped between them and continued to follow her, though I had no recollection as to why or who she was. The same breeze that swept through my bedclothes and moistened my skin parted the lower half of her coat, and she clacked ahead of me with musk-brown hair and an awkward limp, humming some strange tune. Perhaps, I reasoned, she has a sick kid, and the middle of the night house call awoke me suddenly, as to cause temporary amnesia and disorientation. It seemed logical, though I couldn't imagine being bothered unless she offered double the normal fee. "Miss," I dared, "how much further?" Click-clank, click-clank. She took 2 more steps and paused so long, I thought her a statue. Her shoulders stiffened as I watched her, and she began to turn her head. "Just a bit further. You can make it, right?" When she faced me, I was shocked to see she was a vision, with smooth, pale skin beneath a brunette crown of tendrils. The juicy moon dripped light into her brown eyes. The world around us was hazy, forcing me to focus only on her. Not that I minded, for what I thought at first to be some common frumpy wench was indeed a poised goddess. I started to remember. She'd spoken as I cracked the heavy door, startled from my slumber. When I opened it fully, she stood there, a perfect, tender smile spread across her lovely face. "Come with me," she said, though I took it to be more a plea. Without question, I'd followed her into the street. But there was promise of pay, wasn't there? And what was the reason? The details fluttered about in my mind like impossible butterflies, and I chased them, unsuccessfully. "Are you ready to continue?" I nodded, unable to speak in the presence of such beauty, slender and sturdy, with a voice like an angel. It wrapped me in reassurances as I continued forward, and she floated along, a phantom in the night. She was an angel, no limp this time, just a beautiful tune like a flute emitted from her lips, and I was drawn. I wondered, rather guiltily, if her husband had died, and I formed a mental list as to why I was the most eligible and logical choice for her remarriage. Nearing 45, I'd amassed quite a fortune as a doctor due to my savvy financial skills and often miserly existence. Sure, on occasion I raised the rates of my services to pad my savings, but such a thing could be overlooked if I kept her in comfort. Perhaps her conscience was a vague semblance of itself, an outline of responsibility and duty similar to mine. But who was she? I chased another butterfly, capturing it in my inquisitive net. She hadn't provided details when she came to my door. She merely requested I follow her, and I did. Why had I? What did she say or do to convince me to leave the warmth of my home? Click-clank, click-clank. It was a distant tapping on a wall, an underwater boom, and finally my ears unclogged and her shoes were making that sound again on the pavement. Her hip tilted roughly, and the wind dismantled the curls in her hair. Rats on his heels, down to the river, while no one's looking. The haze parted, and I could see my surroundings. Darkened and hidden behind drawn drapes like closed eyelids, the windows showed no life inside. Only the feeble reflection of myself in flannel pajamas, shivering like a lost child, pallid and befuddled. My pitiful shadow scaled the walls of the familiar homes as we passed in the night beneath the moonlight. The Christiansens, with their sick daughter Mary, were willing to pay double or triple if I spun a good enough story for the meds to extend her life. Blue front door of the Orlandos, whom I often visited unwarranted to tack onto their bill the steep fees of house calls. The church and the pastor I convinced needed a surgery he could have gone without so that I could maintain his business and reap the financial benefits of weekly post-op checkups for half a year. I captured another memory butterfly, and for some reason I began to recall a trip I took with my parents when I was just a boy. We were on a tour of Germany, hiking the beautiful mountain trails and renting rooms in the quaint bed and breakfasts. My mother insisted we venture to a small town called Hamelin. We walked the streets and gazed at the statues and stained glass windows depicting the tale of the Pied Piper. My mother retold the story, and I listened because, although I already knew it, something about walking those streets made the words come alive. Like a Christmas ornament, the red and green of the stained glass window at City Hall reflected the dim street lamps and gave life to the gleeful man in his festive gold tunic. He tilted his head sideways and played the wooden flute as the faces of the children behind him filled with delight. They followed close as he danced through the cobblestone streets. I grew uneasy. "Which house is yours?" My voice scratched and clawed its way out, a trembling whisper once free. The woman sauntered clumsily ahead, and I almost took flight in the opposite direction. Not far now. Her voice was music, and I scolded myself. My annoyance at the clicking of her heels was due to my impatience. Certainly the light caught her at an odd angle, attributing to her unseemly appearance, for now she was Helen of Troy, prepared to launch 1,000 ships. I watched her hips sway, my beautiful night phantom, as I eagerly trailed her. Rats on his heels, down to the river, while no one's looking. Listen to the music. We passed old Mrs. Tanner's house on the edge of town, and I frowned. The woman accused me publicly of cheating her, and threatened a lawsuit, which prompted an investigation of my practices. I kept my books clean and promised to deal with her, swap out her medicine for poison, and miss this little detail during an autopsy. A thin, white face grinned back at me from behind curtains that pulled back at an angle. Old Mrs. Tanner watched as I strolled the night, and I tossed her a look of disgust. She opened her mouth wider and tossed her head back in silent laughter. The humming grew louder, and I knew this tune, though I'd never heard it before. I quickened my pace, nearly on her heels. She smelled faintly of roses and honeysuckle. I wanted to see her face again. Click-clack, click-clack. Fear radiated web-like across me, and I withdrew, allowing her to gain considerable distance, and the images of the statues in Hamelin replaced the butterflies in my mind. The gleeful faces of the children as they danced in the streets, hypnotized by the melodic sounds of the flautist. I remembered the effeminate curves of the piper's face and delicate shape of his eyes. Dainty fingers fluttered about the long pipe, and the hips rounded out. I'd never paid attention to it before. How curious. We left the town, waded through the high grass of the plain, just beyond the borders, and into the thickness of the trees that surrounded. Rushing water of the river ahead usually brought me comfort, but this night... Down to the river, listen to the music, drown them all the rats in the city. She was on the other side of the river, and I didn't know how. Just that the currents were too strong and the frigid water too deep to traverse on foot. "Almost there," she smiled, and I wanted to be near her. I took a step, and soon the icy water hugged my waist and crept up my chest. She whistled a melody and mimed rapid movements with her fingers as though mastering a flute, watching as the current swept my legs from beneath me and carried me down to the depths and away from the city.